Won't you please, won't you please, please won't you be my neighbor? Hi neighbor, welcome again to this neighborhood. I'm very excited about what I have in store for you today. I just got back from seeing the recent documentary on Fred Rogers called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I'm about to review it right now. Would you like to come along? I'll take you with me. Let's go. Now, documentaries are movies, but they are about nonfiction. And sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction. But I know one thing for sure. There is no one quite like Mr. Fred Rogers. And scene. What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, bringing you my review for the documentary film, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Now, the premise of this documentary follows the life, guiding philosophy, and legacy of Fred Rogers, the creator and host of the popular children's TV show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Going into this movie, I was super enthralled to see it as I heard buzz about this film from, say it with me now, the Sundance Film Festival from earlier this year, with a lot of critical acclaim going towards it, and I myself was instantly hooked to see a documentary about the life and times of Mr. Fred Rogers. Now, I, as many children over the past few decades, have remembered growing up and watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on television. In fact, I also remembered him crossing over into the animated TV show Arthur on the same network, PBS. As a kid, that blew my mind, seeing someone from another TV show pop up in another show on the same channel. What also blew my mind was that Rogers sadly passed away back in 2003. I was 5 years old when he passed on, yet I didn't know he had actually passed away until a couple years later when I got more internet savvy, or maybe my mom told me at one point, but I simply don't remember. Either way, in the decade and a half since Rogers' passing, he has still left an impactful mark on my generation and generations before mine in shaping children into being kind human beings. This experience was also made more special, to me at least, for this movie being the first ever documentary film that I've seen in theaters. And this is also only the second ever documentary that I've reviewed here on my channel. The first being Ava DuVernay's 13th. That was also the first Netflix release that I reviewed on my channel. And this was way back in October of 2016, so it's been quite a while since I've talked about a documentary. Now, when it comes to approaching a documentary film to review it, it's quite different than talking about a movie with a free-flowing narrative, as for one thing, there are not any specific performances you can really talk about unless you're referring to all the talking heads that show up in between the footage and photos shown off that contribute to the main subject matter that is being tackled. But in referring to that, the people that do show up here to give their anecdotes on Fred Rogers and the making of his TV show include the likes of his wife, his two sons, some people behind the scenes of the show, including some actors in front of the camera, and just other friends of Fred Rogers from real life. And I think they all contribute immensely to what comes to the authenticity of reinforcing who Mr. Rogers was and how they felt in interacting with him, or what the show and him personally meant to each and every one of them. This also goes in line with the structure of this film, as it sets up a timeline of sorts as we see the development of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and going by specific time frames to where specific topics of importance to Rogers were tackled, and we see some
archive footage of the show itself and even behind the scenes footage to where some of these episodes were being made. I got a total kick out of seeing a lot of these various snippets from the TV show on the big screen. And though I have seen a lot of these clips in the past, either on television itself or on my computer through YouTube, they added to how this movie does progress in also giving us some insight as to who Mr. Rogers was behind the scenes, in how he wanted to really bestow a lot of the messages that he felt were super meaningful to his television neighbors. Granted, half of the points brought up in this film I've actually known and seen before, such as him going before the US Senate to try to fight for PBS getting $20 million in funds for his TV show and other public broadcasting, though that sequence in the film really parlayed and had a lot of tenacity to where we see Rogers. What I also think added on uniquely and seamlessly to the flow of this movie was the addition of some 2D animated sequences to where Rogers is depicted as a small tiger, clearly reminiscent of Daniel's striped tiger from his own TV show and even the recent spin-off Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which I think now has been running for a little over half a decade, which is amazing. I like how his legacy is living on through today's generation too. So with those sequences, they added more to the emotional side. The original score that chimed in during a lot of these sequences also added on, not just with an emotional factor, but also feeling the aura of how we're supposed to be transfixed in what we're seeing on screen, especially during this one sequence where we see archive footage of Rogers swimming, and that actually has a pretty big significance to who he is as a person, and just seeing that and how well shot it was, even though that wasn't specifically made for this documentary. A lot of shots in this movie I felt are striking even in their most simple and traditional manners that are displayed. In turn, all the sequences in the film are edited beautifully, and the direction by Morgan Neville is tightly delicate, with his broad strokes of instilling in us what we're supposed to see and feel being super effective, in my opinion. This guy has previously directed 20 Feet from Stardom, which earned him the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, and though I have not seen that documentary film, it shows what a talent he is in being able to get us so engrossed with how Rogers and his TV show were developed, as if I wasn't already invested enough with the subject matter itself. It's paced out pristinely with a running time of about 93 minutes, so it's a quick watch, but this movie never skipped a beat or dragged, and even after a certain point towards the end, I felt sad inside because this movie was ending. I wanted to learn more about Mr. Rogers, or see a lot more archive footage for that matter, and it also goes into a flaw of sorts. One would consider this probably that, but I'll mention it anyway, in that, yeah, I did want more. This movie doesn't give a complete picture, per se, of Mr. Rogers and the development of his show. It does skip around a bit and spotlights only specific moments. But at the same time, too, the movie would be much longer than 93 minutes and would actually feel like it's having a lot of excess towards it. So I think it was best that this movie was condensed down to about an hour and a half, as it gave a lot of the most important points and bits of information needed to also complement this movie flowing as a film, a visual medium, and us seeing Mr. Rogers and his TV show being put in an encapsulation like this. And this was a super daunting task, I would imagine, to even make a movie about Mr. Rogers and showing off all of what this guy did as basically a second Jesus Christ or a saint. As this movie was concluding, without giving too much away, the interviewees were asked to take a silent minute to think about those that have impacted them the most in their lives. One person, of course, said Fred Rogers. And I did the same. I did the same in taking that moment to think about those who have impacted me the most in my life. I even took some more moments to think about that as the movie ended and the credits were rolling, as I sat through the entirety of them. And it did make me think a lot more of Fred Rogers. I mean, I sat through an entire movie spotlighting him. But also in that moment, it recaptured to me not just how important he is to how society is functioning now, but how he is a part of... just the way he is a part of how he is trying to shape young people to be the best that they can be. I mean, I was teetering on the edge of really breaking down while watching this movie, and, I was teary-eyed throughout, and I was quite choked up at certain moments too, but, wow. Really, I think it hit me the most now in how I've thought about all of my family, my friends, and others who have really contributed to shaping who I am today. And Fred Rogers, even to the most subtlest extent, was a part of that. Wow. I really didn't expect to get emotional reviewing this film, as I already experienced as I watched it a few hours ago. And that's a further testament to how documentaries like these that have affected me long after I've seen them really reign true in presenting what they show to the most caring and affectionate of manners. And with a movie like this that has such a fascinating subject at its core, I cannot imagine any other way this would have been told other than the way it was told right before me for all 93 minutes of it. For those who are major fans of Mr. Rogers, such as myself, and who have really been touched by him and his messages through the years, this is a required viewing, without a doubt. But for those who weren't even aware of Mr. Rogers much, or, God forbid, you don't know who Mr. Rogers is at all, this is also a must-watch. I'm also going to say this right now. Won't You Be My Neighbor has just become my favorite movie of 2018 thus far, in short, for it being an emotionally insightful retrospective on our favorite neighbor. It has been slowly expanding to more theaters across the US. I cannot think of any reason to not see this film. This is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. I cannot recommend it more highly enough. My final verdict for Won't You Be My Neighbor is 5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Won't You Be My Neighbor, social media links in the description, subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.